Welcome to Channel 1 because we're number 1. Today we'll be introducing South Africa and its struggles for racial inequality.
We will be informing you about the history of the region,
Background information about apartheid,
protests and fights against apartheid,
life in South Africa post-apartheid,
and life in South Africa today. South Africa is a multiracial society with 4 authentic groups. This includes whites, blacks, colored, and Asians. Colored people are white and black.
Before 1994, black South Africans couldn't hold office or vote. For 50 years, whites had South Africa under a policy called apartheid, or separateness.
Whites and non-whites lived apart. Also, if you were going to the doctors, if you had colored skin, you would be treated less fair than the people with white skin. This policy hurt non-white authentic groups.
South Africa's colonial period ended in 1910.
In that year, the Union of South Africa became an independent country.
This new constitution allowed whites power over government.
Segregation became a way of life in South Africa after independence.
In 1948, ruling whites took this a step further.
Whites made apartheid part of the government policy.
South Africans were now classified by race.
Whites and non-whites were kept separate from each other. They lived in separate neighborhoods, went to different schools, hospitals, movie theaters, and they even had to take separate trains and buses. There were public signs that said, "For whites only." Before apartheid, blacks had formed groups to protest against the whites' unfair treatment. One of the most important groups was the ANC, which stands for African National Congress. This was formed in 1912. It would take the ANC decades of power to protest and gain the voice of the blacks.
An ANC lawyer, Nelson Mandela, took charge of this fight against apartheid laws.
In 1962, Mandela went to jail for his protest activities. He stayed there for
27 years.
That's right, 27 years.
The worst violence began in the township of Soweto in 1976, a June morning.
10,000 students were gathered for a protest march.
Police tried to break up the protest, but some kids threw rocks in response.
The police opened fire. By the end of the day, 172 protesters lied there dead. Some whites, colored, and Asians joined South Africa in the struggle.
Mandela became the world's most famous prisoner.
The United Nations called for him to be released from jail. In 2001, blacks took home half of the income made in South Africa. Before, whites took home most of it.
Blacks still earned far less money than the whites though.
By 2010, the government wanted 25% of business in South Africa to be run by blacks. The law required people to be paid all fairly.
This act also caused resentment with the whites because they thought that it was unfair that they couldn't get jobs just because they were white.
Even with all these changes in South Africa, some of them still lack jobs. This is because of the slow rate of economy. Any student attending public school in South Africa today would learn the basics.
This wasn't always the case though. During apartheid, there were separate schools for each ethnic group. Students who attended the black schools didn't learn math or science.
I heard that wasn't by accident. The government knew that people with math or science skills could get paid higher than others who didn't. By not teaching these skills to blacks, the government made sure South Africa had a supply of cheap labor.
In general, the more years of school somebody has completed, the more he or she will be paid. In South Africa, more than half the adults with no education are poor.
What? I didn't hear about that, but the end of apartheid had brought many big changes in education.
The amount of money the government spends on schooling has risen sharply. Also, children of all ethnic groups can go to school together.
It is strongly encouraged to stay in school. The amount of students that have graduated high school has risen, although the total college enrollment has been hurt due to slow economic growth.
During apartheid, the whites lived in nice houses and had good living conditions. But now, the non-whites are moving into better areas of the city and they have better houses.
Cities are becoming less segregated. Non-whites, some of them, can't afford houses though, so they have to stay in the slums. Although, in the first decade after apartheid, the government provided 1.6 million houses for poor South Africans.
The government is working to make parts of South Africa better. They're building at schools, police stations, and health clinics in poor areas.
Along with the housing, the government is improving healthcare.
Today, South Africa is trying hard to bring healthcare to all.
9 out of 10 doctors are still in rural areas.
By 2005, the government had built over 500 health clinics in rural areas.
Pregnant women and children under 6 get health care for free. To conclude, South Africa has had its struggles for racial inequality, but now, after apartheid, it's gotten better.
South Africa is really trying to build up its economy and helping its people more.
That's it. That's all for today's Number 1 News.
Channel 1!
Because we are number 1!